Let's dive deeper into the mystery of behavioral modernity, expanding on the foundations laid out, while weaving in the nuances of human evolution and genetics. My aim is to unpack this as if I'm sitting across from you, explaining it over coffee, with the clarity of someone who spent 7 decades studying the twists and turns of our species' story. We'll explore why it took so long for Homo sapiens to start acting human, why the signs were missed, and how our cousins, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and others, fit into this tangled family tree. I'll keep it approachable, grounded, and rich with insights, while avoiding any rehash of the opening or closing. The idea of a sudden revolution 50,000 years ago, where humans abruptly became artists, storytellers, and innovators, is tempting because it's dramatic. It's like imagining a light switch flipping on in our brains. But the evidence tells a different story, one of slow, uneven progress, like a fire smoldering for millennia before it finally blazes. Let's look at the clues that show behavioral modernity wasn't a single leap, but a long, winding path. Take Blombos Cave in South Africa, where archaeologists found those engraved ochre pieces dating back 100,000 years. These aren't just random scratches. The crosshatch pattern suggests intentional design, maybe even a kind of proto-art or symbolic marking. Nearby, those shell beads with drilled holes, used as jewelry or status symbols, hint at people who cared about how they looked or what their accessories said about them. That's not just surviving. That's self-expression, identity, maybe even culture. And at pinnacle point, 164,000-year-old evidence of heat-treated stone tools and shellfish harvesting shows advanced planning and environmental know-how. These folks weren't just reacting to the world, they were shaping it. Now, let's push even further back. At Deep Kloof Rock Shelter, also in South Africa, researchers found ostrich eggshells etched with geometric patterns, some as old as 60,000 years. These weren't just water containers. They were decorated, possibly carrying social or symbolic meaning. In Kafsa Cave in Israel, 100,000-year-old burials include red ochre and marine shells placed with the dead, suggesting ritual or emotional significance. These discoveries stretch the timeline of symbolic behavior far beyond the 50,000-year mark, showing that Homo sapiens were experimenting with meaning, art, and identity for tens of thousands of years. So why did it take so long for these sparks to catch fire? The answer lies in a mix of biology, environment, and, most critically, numbers. Our brains, physically indistinguishable from those of modern humans, were capable of complex thought 200,000 years ago. The hardware was there. But culture isn't just about individual genius. It's about collective memory, shared knowledge, and the ability to pass ideas across generations. For that, you need enough people living close enough with enough stability to keep the flame alive. Picture a lone genius in a small band of 20 hunters, inventing a new way to carve bone into a flute. If she dies before teaching anyone, or if her group scatters, that flute is just a footnote in the dirt. This is cultural drift, when ideas, no matter how brilliant, vanish because there's no one to carry them forward. For most of our early history, Homo sapiens lived in tiny, scattered groups, maybe a few thousand people across all of Africa. Genetic studies suggest that around 70,000 to 80,000 years ago, our population hit a bottleneck, possibly due to the Toba supervolcano eruption, dropping to as few as 1,000 to 10,000 breeding individuals. That's not a civilization. That's a small town spread across a continent. Now, fast forward to 60,000 to 50,000 years ago. Something shifts. The climate in parts of Africa and beyond stabilizes, making food and resources more reliable. Populations grow. Groups start clustering along coasts, rivers, and fertile valleys, places where you can settle for a while, not just pass through. With more people comes more interaction, trade, marriage, storytelling. Ideas that once died with their inventors now spread, adapt, and build on each other. It's like a snowball rolling downhill, gathering mass until it's unstoppable. This is what researchers like Alison Brooks and John Hoffaker have argued. Culture doesn't explode because of a single mutation or a lone genius. It takes off when there's a critical mass of people connected enough to share and refine their innovations. Think of it like the internet. One person with a great idea in 1980 couldn't start a viral trend without a network. By 50,000 years ago, Homo sapiens were building their own network, not with fiber optics, but with footpaths, trade routes, and campfires. Let's revisit the FOXP2 gene, once hailed as the key to our cultural leap. When it was discovered in the 1990s, linked to speech disorders in a British family, it seemed like the holy grail of language evolution. Scientists found that FOXP2 regulates other genes tied to brain development, and the hype grew. Maybe this was the language gene that made us human. The story was clean. 50,000 years ago, a mutation in FOXP2 rewired our brains, unlocking art, language, and culture. But science loves to humble us. In 2007, Svanapavo's team sequenced FOXP2 in Neanderthal DNA and found it was identical to ours. That was a gut punch to the theory. If Neanderthals had the same version, FOXP2 couldn't explain our cultural explosion. Plus, further studies showed that FOXP2's role is more about fine-tuning speech-related muscles and brain circuits, not creating language from scratch. It's important, sure, but it's not the magic bullet. This doesn't mean genetics played no role. Subtle changes in other genes, like those affecting brain connectivity or social behavior, might have nudged us toward greater creativity or cooperation. For example, genes like COMT or DRD2, linked to dopamine regulation, could have influenced risk-taking or imagination, traits useful for innovation. But these changes likely accumulated over tens of thousands of years, not in one dramatic mutation. The genetic story is less about a single spark and more about a slow rewiring, shaped by natural selection and interbreeding with other hominins. Speaking of interbreeding, let's talk about our extended family. Homo sapiens didn't evolve in isolation. We share the world with other humans who were far from the primitive stereotypes we once slapped on them. Neanderthals, for instance, were masters of their environment. Their Mysterian tools, flakes and points crafted with precision, show they understood their materials and their prey. At sites like Le Moustier in France, they used tar-like adhesives to half stone points onto spears, a process requiring heat and planning. That's not brute strength, that's engineering. Their symbolic behavior is even more striking. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, a Neanderthal burial with pollen traces suggests they might have placed flowers with the dead. Was it mourning? A ritual? We can't know. But it's hard to imagine a species without emotion or meaning doing this. In Spain's Cueva de los Avions, 50,000-year-old perforated shells coated with pigment point to Neanderthal jewelry or body art. And those cave paintings at La Paisiega, dated to 64,000 years ago, show they were marking their world with intent, long before we arrived in Europe. Then there's the Denisovans, known from just a few bones and teeth in Siberia's Denisova Cave. Yet their legacy is profound. That polished chlorite bracelet, dated to 40,000 years ago, rivals the craftsmanship of early Homo sapiens. Denisovan DNA, carried by modern populations in Melanesia and Tibet, includes adaptations for high-altitude living, like tweaks to the EPS1 gene. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving in extreme environments, passing on traits that helped us later. And don't forget Homo erectus, the marathon runners of human evolution. Their 500,000-year-old engraved shell from Java shows a mind capable of abstract thought, 500,000 years before we started painting caves. Or Homo naledi, with their tiny brains but deliberate burial practices in South Africa's Rising Star Cave, 200,000 years ago. Even the diminutive Homo floresiensis, the hobbits of Flores, hunted dwarf elephants with stone tools, navigating a complex island world. These species weren't failed experiments. They were parallel branches, each with their own strengths, cultures, and stories. We didn't outsmart them. We outlasted them, thanks to numbers, adaptability, and a bit of luck. Our DNA, 1 to 4% Neanderthal for many, up to 5% Denisovan for some. proves we didn't just compete. We collaborated, loved, and blended. Every time you look in the mirror, you're seeing a family reunion. So why did the 50,000-year revolution idea stick for so long? Blame Europe. In the 19th and 20th centuries, archaeology was largely a European enterprise. When researchers found stunning cave art in Lascaux, France, or Venus figurines in Germany, dated to around 40,000 to 50,000 years ago, they assumed this was the dawn of human creativity. But that's because Homo sapiens didn't reach Europe until then. It wasn't the start of modernity. It was just when we brought it to a new continent. Think of it like discovering a band's first big album and assuming that's when they learned to play. In reality, they've been jamming in Africa for millennia, refining their craft in places like Blombos and Pinnacle Point. Europe's bias wasn't malicious. It was logistical. Digging closer to home was easier, and Africa's archaeological record was underexplored until recent decades. Now, with sites across Africa, Asia, and Oceania, we see the deeper roots of our behavior. This brings us to a crucial shift in how we view evolution. Forget the march of progress image, that line of apes to humans, each step better than the last. It's a ladder myth, implying a single path to perfection with Homo sapiens at the top. Evolution is messier, more like a sprawling tree with branches that fork, intertwine, and sometimes break off. Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo erectus, and others weren't rungs we climbed over. They were branches that grew alongside us, some lasting longer than others. Each branch had its own adaptations. Neanderthals were built for cold, with stocky bodies conserving heat. Denisovans tackled high altitudes. Homo floresiensis shrank to fit their island's scarce resources. We weren't smarter. We were generalists, adaptable to a range of environments, and we got lucky. Climate shifts, diseases, or a bad season could have ended us. That bottleneck 70,000 years ago, it nearly did. We're not the chosen ones. We're the survivors. So what sparked the cultural takeoff around 50,000 years ago? It wasn't a new gene or a sudden burst of brilliance. It was the convergence of three things: population growth, environmental stability, and connectivity. As groups grew larger and more stable, they could sustain complex behaviors. A hunter could teach his spear-throwing technique to his kids, who'd teach it to theirs. A beadmaker could trade her designs with a neighboring group, spreading the idea. Stories told around a fire could last beyond one lifetime. This is why sites from 50,000 years ago, like the cave paintings of Sulawesi, Indonesia, or the intricate tools of East Africa, show such a leap. It's not that humans got smarter. It's that we finally had the numbers and networks to make culture stick. And once it started, it snowballed. By 40,000 years ago, we were sailing to Australia, a 100-kilometer voyage across open water. By 30,000 years ago, we were carving ivory figurines and playing bone flutes. The fire was lit, and it's been burning ever since. Here's the humbling part. We weren't the only ones with minds that wondered, created, or mourned. Neanderthals buried their dead with care. Denisovans crafted jewelry. Homo erectus etched patterns. We didn't invent humanity. We inherited it from a family of thinkers, each contributing to the tapestry. When we paint, sing, or ask why, we're echoing habits that may predate our species. And we're still part of that tree, still evolving. Our DNA carries the ghosts of our cousins, and our culture builds on their foundations. The question isn't just what happened, it's what are we becoming? Because if population and connection drove our past, they'll shape our future too. In a world of 8 billion, with ideas zipping across the globe in seconds, what new fires will we light?